Imagine London in 1666. It was a city teeming with life, a bustling hub of commerce and trade. Narrow, winding streets snaked through a dense maze of buildings. Most of these structures were timber-framed, their wooden beams blackened by time and countless hearths. The city was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Adding to the risk, London lacked a dedicated fire brigade. In the face of a fire, citizens relied on a haphazard system of bucket brigades. These were often too little, too late. They were ill-equipped to handle a large-scale conflagration. The summer of 1666 had been unusually hot and dry. A persistent drought had turned the city into a tinderbox. The wooden buildings, their timbers parched, were primed to ignite. The stage was set for disaster. It was only a matter of time before a stray spark would ignite the city. On the night of September 2nd, 1666, that spark arrived. London's fate hung in the balance. The fire began in the heart of London on Pudding Lane. This narrow, bustling street was a hub of activity filled with shops and homes tightly packed together. It was a typical scene of 17th century London, where the wooden buildings stood shoulder to shoulder, creating a labyrinth of alleys and lanes. The residents of Pudding Lane were accustomed to the hustle and bustle, but on this fateful day their lives would change forever. A baker named Thomas Fariner, his shop located in a narrow alleyway, became an unwitting catalyst for disaster. Fariner was a well-known figure in the community, his bakery a staple for the locals. On the night of September 2nd, 1666, after a long day of baking, Fariner and his family retired to bed unaware of the impending catastrophe. A fire, either left unattended or sparked from embers in the bakery's oven, erupted in the early hours of Sunday morning. The exact cause remains a mystery, but what is certain is that the fire quickly grew out of control. The wooden structure of the bakery, combined with the flammable materials inside, provided ample fuel for the flames. The flames quickly engulfed Fariner's shop. The fire spread with alarming speed, consuming everything in its path. The residents of Pudding Lane awoke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling flames, their homes and livelihoods threatened by the growing inferno. They spread rapidly to the adjacent buildings. The tightly packed wooden structures acted as kindling, allowing the fire to leap from one building to the next with ease. The residents, in a state of panic, tried to save what they could, but the fire was relentless. Fanned by a strong easterly wind, the fire became an inferno, consuming everything in its path. The wind carried the flames further, spreading the destruction across the city. The fire's roar could be heard for miles, a terrifying reminder of its unstoppable force. The firestorm raged through the night, fueled by the dry timber and flammable goods stored within the city's warehouses. The warehouses, filled with goods like oil, tar and pitch, provided the perfect fuel for the fire, causing it to burn even hotter and faster. The narrow streets acted like chimneys, creating a wind tunnel effect. This phenomenon intensified the fire, drawing in more oxygen and feeding the flames. The fire seemed to have a life of its own, moving with a terrifying speed and ferocity. This further intensified the blaze. The fire's heat was so intense that it caused buildings to spontaneously combust, adding to the chaos and destruction. The city's firefighting efforts were overwhelmed, and it became clear that this was no ordinary fire. The fire spread with terrifying speed, leaping from building to building. The residents could do little but watch in horror as their city was consumed by flames. The fire's relentless advance seemed unstoppable, and the night sky was lit up by the inferno. It transformed the night sky into a terrifying spectacle of orange and red. The glow of the fire could be seen for miles, a beacon of destruction that marked the city's suffering. The once bustling streets of London were now a scene of chaos and despair. By daybreak, a significant portion of London was ablaze. The fire showed no signs of slowing down, and the city's residents were left to wonder how much more would be lost. The scale of the destruction was unimaginable, and the fire's path of devastation seemed endless. The fire had transformed the city's heart into a raging inferno. The central areas of London, once the vibrant core of the city, were now unrecognizable. The fire's impact would be felt for years to come as the city faced the daunting task of rebuilding. The Great Fire of London had begun. This catastrophic event would go down in history as one of the most devastating fires ever to strike a major city. Its legacy would shape the future of London, leading to new building regulations and fire safety measures that would change the city forever. As the fire raged, King Charles II took personal charge of the situation. Recognizing the gravity of the crisis, he set aside protocol and took to the streets alongside his brother James, Duke of York. They joined the desperate citizens in their fight against the inferno. Charles II authorized the use of gunpowder to create firebreaks. These controlled demolitions were intended to starve the fire of fuel by clearing out buildings in its path. However, the fire's intensity and speed often outpaced these efforts. The king faced criticism for his initial reluctance to order large-scale demolitions. Some feared he hesitated to destroy property. However, his actions demonstrate a monarch deeply involved in combating the disaster, even personally directing firefighting efforts. Charles II's leadership, though sometimes questioned, provided a vital sense of order and direction. This was essential in those chaotic hours as London burned. Section 4. A city in chaos, desperation, destruction, and a surprisingly low death toll. The Great Fire of London was a scene of unimaginable chaos. It began on the 2nd of September 1666 in a small bakery on Pudding Lane. What started as a minor blaze quickly escalated into a raging inferno fueled by strong winds and the wooden structures that dominated the city. The firestorm raged for 4 days and nights, consuming everything in its path. The flames leapt from building to building, creating a wall of fire that seemed almost unstoppable. The city's firefighting methods were primitive, relying on bucket brigades and fire hooks, which proved woefully inadequate against the ferocity of the blaze. Panicked citizens fled their homes, carrying whatever meager possessions they could salvage. Families were separated in the chaos, and the streets were filled with the cries of the desperate and the dying. People sought refuge wherever they could, from the open fields outside the city to the boats on the River Thames. The streets were choked with refugees, carts overflowing with belongings, and the deafening roar of the fire. The city's narrow alleys and wooden buildings created a perfect storm for the fire to spread rapidly, leaving little time for residents to escape. The sense of urgency and fear was palpable as people scrambled to save their lives and whatever they could carry. The fire consumed everything in its path: homes, businesses, churches, even the city's iconic bridge. St. Paul's Cathedral, a symbol of the city's resilience, was reduced to ruins. The loss of property was staggering, with over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and numerous public buildings destroyed. The heat from the blaze was so intense that it melted metal and cracked stone. The fire created its own weather system, with swirling winds and firestorms that further fueled the destruction. The sheer power of the fire left an indelible mark on the city, both physically and psychologically. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning wood. Visibility was reduced to almost nothing, and the smoke could be seen for miles around. The suffocating atmosphere added to the terror as people struggled to breathe and find their way to safety. Despite the scale of the destruction, the official death toll from the Great Fire was surprisingly low, with only a handful of confirmed fatalities. This low number is often attributed to the fact that many people had time to escape the slow-moving fire, and the fire broke out in a less densely populated area of the city. However, this low number is likely inaccurate, as it excludes those who perished in the fire itself or died later from injuries or exposure. Many of the city's poorest residents, who lived in the crowded and flammable wooden tenements, may have been unaccounted for in the official records. The true human cost of the fire, while difficult to quantify, was undoubtedly far greater than the official records suggest. The Great Fire of London remains a poignant reminder of the vulnerability of cities to disaster and the resilience of their inhabitants in the face of unimaginable adversity. Section 5. Rising from the ashes. Rebuilding a safer and more resilient London. Even as the embers still glowed, Londoners began the daunting task of rebuilding their city. The devastation was immense. The fire had ravaged homes, businesses, and landmarks, leaving a once thriving metropolis in ruins. The scale of destruction was almost unimaginable, with entire neighborhoods reduced to ash and rubble. Yet, amidst the chaos and despair, a collective resolve began to take shape. Yet from the ashes arose a spirit of resilience and a determination to create a better, safer London. Communities banded together, sharing resources and labor to clear the debris and start anew. The sense of unity and shared purpose was palpable as everyone from laborers to merchants to nobility contributed to the monumental effort. New building regulations, stricter than ever before, were swiftly enacted. These regulations were designed to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. They included detailed guidelines on the materials that could be used, the spacing between buildings and the construction techniques that would be required. Timber, the primary culprit in the fire's rapid spread, was largely banned in favor of brick and stone. These materials were not only more fire-resistant, but also more durable, promising a longer-lasting infrastructure for the city. The shift from timber to brick and stone marked a significant change in the architectural landscape of London. Streets were widened to prevent fire from leaping across easily. This change not only improved fire safety, but also enhanced the overall urban design, making the city more navigable and less congested. The wider streets allowed for better airflow and light, contributing to a healthier living environment. London's leaders were determined to learn from the disaster. They held numerous meetings and consultations, drawing on the expertise of architects, engineers, and urban planners. Their goal was not just to rebuild, but to reimagine the city in a way that would make it more resilient to future threats. The rebuilding of London was not just about replacing what was lost, but creating a more modern, fire-resistant city. This involved incorporating the latest advancements in building technology and urban planning. The new London would be a testament to human ingenuity and the ability to adapt and overcome adversity. This was an opportunity to address the shortcomings that had made the city so vulnerable to such a catastrophe. The narrow, winding streets and densely packed wooden buildings had been a recipe for disaster. By redesigning the city layout and enforcing stricter building codes, London could mitigate the risks of future fires. The Great Fire, while a tragedy, became a catalyst for innovation in urban planning and building practices. It spurred a wave of creativity and problem-solving, leading to new methods and materials that would influence construction for generations. The lessons learned from the fire were invaluable, shaping the future of urban development. This would shape the development of London for centuries to come. The city's transformation in the wake of the Great Fire set a precedent for resilience and innovation, laying the groundwork for the modern, bustling metropolis we know today. The legacy of this rebuilding effort is still evident in the city's architecture, planning, and spirit.